The third speaker is going to be Sean Blackman, and he's a member of the Answer Coalition. And he's going to talk about, the transcontinental cooperation, and he's going to try and connect what is happening on the continent of Africa and what is happening here in the U.S. Sean, please.
All right. How's everybody feeling? Very good, very good. I want to thank Inyaka. I want to thank the Forum for the Revival of Pan-Africanism for inviting me to speak. I always enjoy attending the conference, and I'm glad to be able to speak this year. As Inyaka said, my name is Sean Blackman. I am with the Answer Coalition, which means acting out to stop war to stop war and end racism. Also a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and I co-host a radio show here in Washington, D.C. called By Any Means Necessary, along with my friend and comrade Eugene Puryear, who's also here. So basically, I want to speak briefly this evening, if I could, about Sankara and the revolutionary principle of self-determination and how that spirit and that principle is playing out in different movements across the African world today. Because I'm of the opinion that for any colonial subject, for any neo-colonial pseudo-citizen, for any member of an oppressed community, there's always a kind of bubbling impulse to take the reins of those institutions which govern your life, to seize control of a society hell-bent of robbing you of your full personhood and remaking it in your image and likeness so that your material condition mirrors that tenacious dignity which you refuse to forfeit. Yes, whether expressed in a reactionary way, a liberal way, a progressive way, or a revolutionary way, this desire for self-determination is as natural as the very beating of our heart, and is as instinctive as the inhaling and exhaling of our breath. Our dear comrade Thomas Sankara understood this, felt it himself on a molecular level, which is why it was so important to transform the former Upper Volta from a colony controlled first by exploiters of another shade and hue to a neo-colony controlled by folks whose face resembled that of the people, but whose interests lied only with themselves and whose loyalty lied with the oppressors of old, to finally becoming Burkina Faso, the land of upright men, where a person could have input into national development and actually benefit from their labor, to actually get to enjoy some of the fruits of the wealth that they produce. Thereby creating an incentive for the people of that nation to act in the national interest, because now the national interest, in a more immediate sense, is their interest. So this change from the Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, then, it wasn't just like a cosmetic change. It wasn't just, a hip thing to do, because that's what the rest of the continent is doing. It very much required a change in consciousness of the people so that the actual shift in society that must take place on a material basis can happen. 30 years after Sankara's death, we're seeing a kind of resurgence of self-determination across the African world, with formations experimenting with different forms of radical democracy, all of them designed to repudiate the hierarchical and patriarchal character of imperialism and to make the welfare of the collective the chief concern, not the acquisition of capital. In Jackson, Mississippi, we've seen the rise of Cooperation Jackson, a movement that focuses on underemployed and unemployed black and brown workers using a co-op structure to develop what they call, quote, an alternative built on equity, cooperation, worker democracy, and environmental sustainability, end quote. And I believe it was last week we had a brother on named Ajamu Nangwaya, who's a Jamaica-based educator, and he's co-authoring a book on Cooperation Jackson called Jackson Rising with Kali Akuno. And what he told us is that central to the whole Cooperation Jackson structure is the people's assemblies. Now, these are groupings with no set hierarchy that act as a form of direct democracy and participatory democracy that engages in collective decision-making, which is then carried out by a task force. And that construct comes from something called the Jackson-Kush Plan, which is a construct of self-determination with its roots in the Republic of New Africa, itself a group that was based on principles of land and what we in the local movement would call black radical self-governance and autonomy. And this trickled down to the New African Peoples Organization and the Malcolm X grassroots movement. So now we look to Jackson, Mississippi, of all places. And when we talk about self-determination as the word, we see it there made flesh. We see similar developments in South Africa with the economic freedom fighters who describe themselves as radical, leftist, anti-capitalist, and anti-imperialist, and who ultimately believe that political power without economic emancipation is meaningless. And as the inheritors of the South African liberation movement, they explicitly state their desire to establish a society based on revolutionary values and to support anti-colonial and anti-imperialist movements the world over. And we can see Sankara's influence, I think, in the EFF's sort of explicit opposition to the oppression of women, their opposition to sexism, homophobia, and all these other oppressive ideologies. So it's become clear that a new generation of African people are recognizing themselves as living under neo-colonialism. And it's no coincidence that we tend to see a lot of overlap in their program and in their tactics, because they realize that no matter what issues plague us as oppressed people, whichever one you can talk about, ultimately capitalism lay at the root of these ills. Therefore, the destruction of capitalism must be central. Now, right here in the U.S., the Movement for Black Lives a little while ago put out a beautiful platform that not only called for an end to racist police terror and for cities to invest in the education, health, and safety of marginalized communities, but it called for community control of institutions, reparations, and political power. So you see how, these same themes, these same motifs sort of keep cropping up. And these movements are basically asking the question, what can we do to wrestle power from the state and from the state's minions so that we can sort of have more control over the lives, our families, and our communities? Now, whether we're talking about Jackson, Mississippi, or South Africa, the black folks in Colombia that's protesting human rights right now, the folks in Togo who are standing up against nepotism and corruption in government, no matter where you go on this earth, you could see African people once again proclaiming that they will no longer abide exploitation, they will not abide subjugation, and they will not stand for white supremacy or neo-colonialism, which, as we know, is just white supremacy in blackface, nor do we feel the need to maintain the capitalist system that gives an institutional base for this oppression. And speaking of neo-colonialism, it's funny, Sankara said that these neo-colonial politicians and figures, they have contempt for the masses, right? They're driven only by their own selfish interests and do not hesitate to employ, quote, the most dishonest means, engaging in massive corruption, embezzlement of public funds and properties, influence peddling and real estate speculation, and practicing favoritism and nepotism, end quote. They steal. What's the word, brother? Voulez? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? That's what it is. And so we know a lot about neo-colonialism in Washington, D.C., right? Let's look at our mayor, Muriel Bowser, right? Black woman, young, native of this city. Sounds good, right? But we're talking about someone who, in her time as mayor, has actively worked to have a negative impact on the material conditions of poor and working black folks in this city. And I can think of two major ways she's done this off the top of my head. Number one, housing, certainly. All right? People like her are in cahoots with developers like Jeff Graffis and Sanford Capital to push black folks out of their homes, lie to them and tell them they can come back, and to ultimately push them out of the city so that folks with more money can live there. And that's why the chocolate city ain't so chocolate no more. So who's pushing back against this? It's these very same grassroots folks. It's the tenants down in Congress Heights and Southeast. It's the tenants over in Brooklyn Manor in Northeast. And they're working with organizations like 1DC and Justice First. Because, you know, their attitude is that, like, we've been here. We have a right to be here. And we don't intend to go anywhere. Not without a fight. You see what I mean? So even right here in this city on a very real basis, I also organized with a group called Stop Police Terror Project DC. And one of the things we've been able to achieve is getting a piece of legislation called the NEAR Act fully funded. And what that does in essence is pretty much create a violence interruption program for poor and working black communities so that they don't have to deal with the police. Because every community needs security. But oppressed communities, least of all, most of all, I would say, do not need the presence of the police because we see what happens. People are killed. People are brutalized. People are arrested and funneled into the mass incarceration system. And the good folks, our friends at PACA, Pan-African Community Action, they're working on trying to get community control of the police in a real way here in Washington, D.C. So we're glad to be working with them that as well. So when we take a look at all these different self-determination movements that African people are engaging in here in D.C., here in the United States, in South America, on the continent and beyond, how do we measure its success, right? How do we know that we're even moving the needle? Well, I know here in the U.S. recently, the FBI has come out with this thing that basically says now that that wants to call folks black identity extremists. And it's very interesting because the examples they give in their language talk specifically about the Black Liberation Army and groups that were around in the 60s and 70s. Which is interesting because it's like, you know, if you study the history of COINTELPRO and stuff like that, it's like a rerun. Because back then they called them, what, black nationalist hate groups? And now anyone identified with those same sort of politics, now we're black identity extremists. And that doesn't even make sense. What is a black identity extremist? I identify as black. Is that what makes me extreme? And it doesn't even really give a kind of, it's just this super vague sort of thing. So it's obvious that it's been developed to cast a wide net over anyone who is critical of white supremacy, anyone who is critical of capitalism, to sort of, you know, again, make them this sort of boogeyman element. So the same system, the same state apparatus that assassinated Sankara, that assassinated Patrice Lumumba, that assassinated Malcolm X and Maurice Bishop, and all these types of folks, is now seems to be ramping up to launch yet another repressive campaign. So where do we go from here? I think the most important thing we can do is continue to push forward with this spirit of Sankara and with the understanding that if we are going to have the changes that we seek, ultimately we're going to have to take our hands and reach them into the soil so that we can destroy this system that sought to make us something less than human and create a society where we can finally stand in the fullness of upright personhood. Thank you.
Something is going on in Africa. Of course, you didn't have enough time, you know, to give all the details. For those who are following the situation in Africa, in Togo, the people's movement has been in the street, you know, for months to try and end the Eyadema dynasty. Eyadema was one of the neo-colonial leader involved in to advance French neo-colonialism after 40 years in power. He put his son there. And then in 1992, they agreed upon term limit in Burkina Faso, in Togo. And I believe that that constitution was voted and adopted, and God knows how it works, on October 14, 1992. And then today, our friends are fighting in the streets, and then they want to end, the dynasty of the Ademars. And then the political party that is leading the movement over there is a Pan-African political party. And this is, so we've been supporting that. My friend Maurice Kane will come in a few, to talk about some of the action that we need to do to try and support, the actions of the people in Togo. There is a campaign against the CFA franc. It's a currency that people are using in Africa, in 14 African countries. It was put into place by France. It has been in place for 70 years. And then according to the agreement since 1960 that African countries are independent, we have to deposit 50% of our foreign reserves in the French public treasury. Whoever comes and talks about it, you die. The first to die was Sylvanus Olympio, the president, the first president of Togo. And there are some young people in Africa that launch a campaign, and then in many capitals, this is a powerful movement that we have to support, and it's a very interesting thing. All those signs are showing what Sean Blackman just spoke about. There is a new African that is being born. In Benin, there's a multinational, as we talk about capitalism, they call it is Bouygues. In Ivory Coast, in Senegal, in Togo, everywhere you go in those Francophone countries, controlling water, electricity, the roads, the railroads, everything. And then recently, people in Benin, they filed, they took them to court, and they won. And this is things that are happening. Of course, in the case of Gbagbo, who was in prison at the International Criminal Court. And then after a controversial election, today, the same European who put Ouattara there in power, they can no longer come out and say that they did the right thing. And around the situation of Gbagbo, Ivorians, Togolese, Beninese, people are fighting all over Africa to try and fight against neocolonialism and imperialism. In a few, Maurice will come and talk about that. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation. And now I'm going to call on Selome Gerima. Oh, you don't want? I want you to come now. Selome Gerima is going to talk. And Selome, she's going to have 15 minutes. Selome, I'm going to be hard on you, Selome, as usual, because I know my sister. She loves Sankara so much. When she starts, when she says 5 minutes, just like that, she can take 15. But we were looking for somebody who met Thomas Sankara, and then she always comes to our conferences, and then she never asked to be on a panel. And then she told me that she wanted to have 5 minutes, and then Fai is the one who told me, no, put Selome on the panel. I said, yes, this is a brilliant idea. So I'm happy to have one of our friends. She's been coming to the conferences, asking questions, making comments. Today, Selome, you have 15 minutes, 1-5, to speak to the audience about Sankara.
Good evening. I hope the audience will allow me to give me 20 minutes. Because he's always pressing me 5 minutes, 2 minutes, all the time like that. So I hope you will help me in that. I went to Burkina Faso with my husband, Dr. Tayyip Zuna, over there. He was there for 20 years, and me from 1984 to 1989. During my time there, that it was my first time to see a president as simple as anything that I never expect throughout my entire life. I'm a 66-old mother, grandmother, and so forth. During this time, that was my first time to see a president very simple, low profile, not only him, his family, his children, and Madam Mariam Sankara. And his high officials were very simple. Here now, what I wanted to share with you is, I just wanted, I just list all some of my diary during my stay in Burkina Faso. In the first place, that was my first experience to live in colonized country, independent, and I was not able to see. I was, in fact, my coming out from my country to America, and then go to Burkina Faso. I advise all my African brothers and sisters, instead of traveling, visiting La Tour or the monument of this country, the space, the White House, it's better to visit around our continent so that our mind of thinking will be conscious. Today, you may think it as if it is a gossip, but it is not a gossip. This is my observation that I'm reading to you, what I listed down, some of my experience. It was, as I told you, he was President Sankara was very simple and low profile. I saw him without any bodyguard, with my own eyes, riding a bicycle whenever he wanted to visit his family or personal friends. I saw him myself, a president, riding a bicycle. Sometimes he goes on Sundays with his baguette to have breakfast with his parents. He never used, as far as I have seen and got comment from my Burkinabe friends, he never used any government vehicles for his personal affairs. I used to see Madame Sankara driving her old blue Toyota car whenever she goes to work. Sometimes we'll see each other, me with a diplomat car with a driver, and the president, first lady, driving her car. I have seen her with my own eyes. I saw their kids going to local school, walking like other ordinary kids. When during his time, I saw also Sankara when he goes to work. He sits next to his driver with a white Renault vehicle. This is my witness. Sankara was one who changed the name of a country, his country, from colonizer's name Haute-Volta or Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, like Nkrumah, Gold Coast into Ghana, but Côte d'Ivoire, The president do not want, the ex-president, who do not want us even to say Ivory Coast. It has to be Côte d'Ivoire. Okay? So, in French, Côte d'Ivoire, yeah. That's what they mean it. You know the meaning of Burkina Faso, a land of upright men. Because he believed in art and culture, he was the first leader who installed a monument for African filmmakers, the first one. He was the one who encouraged the singers, Africans in the diaspora, to come to it. Burkina Faso was the center of all revolutionaries, dialogue, panel discussions, and art, the center of art shows. Like Fella, I saw him because of Sankara, Madame Doumbia from Mali. Sankara was the first leader who registered his belongings officially. His guitar, his fridge, his blue and old Toyota, his bicycle and his monthly salary. He was very practical. He did not want to waste the government's money. He knows what Burkina Faso afford. He even, when he travels for an official mission within the continent, he either go by commercial plane, he either go through Air Libya or Ethiopian Airlines.
The microphone.
Okay. His trip to Harlem, as you all mentioned. He went to New York for a United Nations conference. He stayed in Harlem with his African brothers and sisters who were snatched from their motherland. He had a wonderful time with his own brothers and sisters. And he says he enjoyed because he feels the touch of Africa. He tried and believed for African people not to use AC, air conditioner. You know, he was very practical. He wanted to save energy of that country. We are born without AC, this artificial man-made weather. Let's use the weather that we were born from the beginning, that we are used. This is what he was lecturing. He was a very effective, action, very practical, simple, low man. And also his personality is so nice, very tender, very friendly, I just, you know, at the time when I first met my king, the late Haile Selassie, Emperor Haile Selassie, he came to me while I was pregnant with my first son. And when he comes to me, because all the time my mother, my grandmother, all the people are saying that he's a divine, he's a divine. And when he comes to me, towards me, and he asked me my name, I said, oh, he's a human being, he talks. I was jerking, but with Sankara, I met him many times. He was as simple as anybody, any regular people. Speaking of he is very strict in encouraging, not strict, but to take action in practice, in wearing our traditional African-made clothing. He wears himself, like the costume that you wear. He was encouraging to have our own textile industry growing. But now, what is going on? Thanks to the Chinese, the Europeans, the Dutch, we are killing our textile industries in Africa. We cannot get this kind of material anymore, thanks to the Chinese. They copied it and sell it in a very cheap price. But Sankara was pushing all African countries to utilize what we produce. He encouraged the agriculture, the farmers, to produce more and encourage the people to buy their own local produce food and materials. He, at one time, he also very much into sharing intellectuals within our continent. Like, for example, he said that for teaching English, we should not bring expatriates from British. We should bring from Ghana, from Nigeria, from any, thanks to the colonizers, from any English-speaking countries. And also to train a pilot or to train in aviation, let's use the most experienced Ethiopian Airlines, African Ethiopian Airlines. Okay, so he was pushing all the products and the textile what we produce, and also all of us were happy, and we were. I have seen, you know, in my life, in my time over there, I have seen imported lettuce, imported pomme de terre, potatoes, tomatoes, while we have a lot of tomatoes, vegetables in our backyard. The farmers produce a lot. So he said, no more imported goods. Let's utilize what we have. Like for any Burkinabe, he prefers to eat mango than apple, imported fruit. So this is what he was pushing. And it went that way after his assassination. I was there. My husband was on a mission. I was with my children when Sankara was when he was killed. And now, I'm sorry, I'm speaking in my head. Anyway, all what his feelings, his action he wanted to do was not happening after he died. It can be a gossip, but it is not a gossip. Let me tell you my experience. After the second day of his assassination, in my workplace, an American worker walked into each department with a large serving plate of variety of imported fruits, serving to the local Burkinabe employees saying, "Félicitations, congratulations. We are now free. We can eat imported fruits." And products from abroad. The employees were very sad that they have no choice. They do not know at that moment, because Sankara was assassinated. Nobody knows what is going to happen. We do not even know if Kampaore is going to take over. We do not know what was going on. There was this military thing on, what do you call it? Military music all over the city. So that was the time when this lady brought the other day, I went to see Madame Sankara to pay my condolence. I was moved when I see her, the first lady, in her second day. She went back to her home with her family, to a regular Burkina Faso house. The other day, when my colleagues were talking about Madame Sankara, they were worried about her, how she's going to make a living. While they were discussing, this American worker asked them, what are you talking about? They told her, look, this happens to Madame Sankara. She has nothing to do to feed her children. She's in a very bad situation. You know what she said mockingly? Oh, is that so? Tell her I can hire her as a nanny to my children. You see, this is what was happening in our continent even now. Immediately after his death, I saw Burkina Faso onion vendor. He has a sack of onion, local, and a sack of imported onion. I asked him, when he saw me, he was telling me, this is imported, this is local. And I asked him, why are you carrying imported onion? He told me, I'm now free. Sankara is dead. I can sell whatever I can. So I asked him, are you happy because Sankara is dead? No, I'm not. But this is what the Le Blanche veut. This is what the white people like. I have to sell for a living. This is what was happening in Burkina. At that time, a French supervisor, while I was working in a medical unit, and this French supervisor sends her specimen to the laboratory through her secretary. So I asked the Burkinabe secretary, why is this yours? No, it is my boss. So take it back and let her bring herself her specimen. So the French lady was so angry at me, and she came and she said, why? Why are you doing that? I sent it through my secretary, I'm busy. I told her, that does not describe in her job description to carry your specimen into wherever you want. And then she said, do you think that I am afraid now? Sankara, who hates French, is no longer around. This is what she said. So, you know, Sankara was not, I don't know, of course, many Europeans, the Lebanese, they left. And when Kampaore came in his power, they returned back. So Burkina became, I never saw it like that because I arrived there during Sankara, and Burkina became completely changed. All the Europeans comes and do all this local work like shoe repairing, like a restaurant, all these things were being occupied by them. And the Burkinabe are just a hard laborer. So it was so, for me, it was a little bit difficult. Even during his government time, during Kampaori, during Sankara, when they invite us for any official invitation, we will notify, my husband will be notified by phone. On this date, there is going to be an invitation, an event at the palace. But during Kampaori, we have been invited with a fancy, expensive invitation card. You know, I'm now telling you what is, of course, it is getting worse and worse, how we are wasting that continent and everywhere black people on this earth. We are spending a lot of money for our hair, for our cosmetic, surgical affairs, for so many things. And Sankara was to have a self-determination of ourselves, to be proud of ourselves, and to be practical, not to waste a lot of money. That was his struggle. A French advisor for Kampaori,
No, 1 minute will be 20.
A French advisor, by the way, I'm almost finished, and they will not let you without me finishing it. A French advisor for transport for Sankara, no, for Kampaori, I'm sorry, for Kampaori, advised him that he has to have a private jet. Kampaori was using his ride through Libya, Ethiopian Airlines, commercial airlines. But Kampaori was being advised by his French advisor for transportation, and they bought, the government, Burkina Faso bought Michael Jackson's private jet for $14 million. Along with the 3 British pilots, which I saw, paid a high salary and given 5-star hotel accommodation. In addition, based on the international aviation policy, that private jet has to be serviced every 2 years, and the charge is $2 million. So that country, whom Sankara struggled a lot to save and to make a change, to improve the conditions of the people, was being replaced by extravaganza. Once Kampaori took power, I noticed all his high officials were using black Mercedes, maybe you must have seen, black Mercedes-Benz, sitting at the back with suit and necktie on. The Sankara style, I haven't seen. After 2 years of Sankara's assassination, I went to pay a visit to his parent with my children. In fact, one of my brother's daughter is over there. She was 7 years old when I took her to see his parent, Sankara's parent. When I go into the house, I saw a picture of both Kampaori and Sankara on the wall. I was furious. I asked his father, why you put Kampaore's picture on the wall, on your wall? He smiled and he replied to me, you know, once upon a time, both of them were my twin sons. So now I'm waiting for my son who killed his brother to come and walk through that door, pointing, and apologize to Madame and me. And I'm waiting. Guess what? After my last trip to Burkina in year 2015.
Vous l'avez découvert ici. Que vous avez découvert Ivoire TV. Ivoire TV.